Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the deck I won the 200 player Birmingham tournament with, and it is of course BOSSK Blue. So I already made a video dedicated to BOSSK in set 2, so you can check this video if you want to learn all the basics and fundamentals of the deck. In this video we're going to be focusing on what are the changes that I've made to the deck in order to adapt to the new Twilight of the Republic meta, which is quite a bit different from the previous meta, mostly because of the fact that Boba is now longer in the picture. And also that we'll talk about all the new additions from the Twilight of the Republic, the card I've decided to include, the card I've decided to not include. And we'll also wrap up this video with basically all the new cards which I think can be very strong against hard control. So if you're not a hard control player but want to beat hard control decks, stay tuned throughout this video because there's going to be some goodies for you as well. So first of all, why did I decided to play BOSSK Control for this specific meta? Well, to me, the meta was very much an aggro focus meta, as is often the case early on in the metagame. Because proactive strategies are usually more powerful early on in the meta. So I wanted to have a deck that was capable of beating those aggro decks, and the only deck that I've managed to find that was able to beat both Sabine and Django was BOSSK Control. So those matchups are about, I would say that the Sabine matchup, from my estimation, is about it depends on the version, but I would say slightly favorable, maybe the 55 to 60% favor for BOSSK. And I would say that the matchup against Django is a lot more favorable. Once again, it depends on the version, but I would say about a 70 to 60% win in favor of BOSSK. It's really a good matchup. And you will understand why as we talk about the different cards that I've decided to include. Obviously, as being a control deck, naturally, control will beat all the mid-range deck and the soft control deck out there, unless those decks have specific techs against control, which they didn't have in this tournament, which makes sense because I don't think anybody was expecting hard control to see a heavy amount of play. Another advantage that you have as a hard control player is that hard control is not super popular as an archetype, generally speaking. So often you're going to be in a situation where there's simply just not that many people playing hard control, even if hard control happens to be very powerful in the meta. And that's another advantage because it means that people are less likely to have sideboard card against it, which obviously is an advantage. So in this tournament, it's exactly what happened because most of the mid-range deck I was facing, I had basically no plan and no sideboard against me. So it happens to be that it was basically throughout the tournament, the only anti-hard control card that I had to worry about was basically TIE Phantoms, which is obviously something that we can very easily solve by playing a lot of -2/-2 in our main deck and sideboard. Actually, BOSSK has no really major difficulties dealing with those TIE Phantoms unless those TIE Phantoms have +1/+1 counters on them. So it was just, in my opinion, a very, very strong choice for this tournament. And in my opinion, the deck choice contributed to my win far more than my skill as a player. I think that I just simply chose the right deck for the right moment. The only hard matchup that I had in the entire tournament was during the final and the semi-final, which, if you've seen those games, were pretty crazy. I also encountered one Han yellow throughout the tournament, which is normally a pretty difficult matchup, but I've managed to win this one without too much difficulties. So yeah, it was just a very, very well positioned deck for the meta that we are in, and I will expect this deck to keep being a strong deck and a strong choice moving forward in the meta because I think Sabine and Django Red are not going anywhere. Obviously, BOSSK Control, I don't expect BOSSK Control to be as free as it was during that tournament because obviously people are going to start taking against it. And there's quite a few strong cards against hard control. If this is a deck that you're afraid of and you want to beat, it is definitely possible to do so. And Twilight of the Republic is actually giving us quite a few new tools to do that. So that's going to be very interesting. So First of all, as I said, in this video, I'm not going to talk about the basics of the deck. I would just assume that you know the basics already, and if you don't, please check out my previous BOSSK control video. So as you can see on the list here, I've decided to go for a pretty kind of like solid, just like kind of standard BOSSK control build. I was not expecting to meet any out control in this, so I have the strict minimum, which is the restock in the main deck, just in order to have, because this card is so important against hard control, and often when you're playing against hard control, you are effectively, you know that it's unlikely that the game 2 is going to matter, so dedicating a lot of sideboard cards to this matchup just didn't really make a lot of sense. So I just had the restock in the main deck to help in game 1, which is by far the most important game, and hopefully I wouldn't meet too many of them, which I haven't, which makes sense when you look at the metagame breakdown of the tournament. So the rest of the deck, just a lot of blue cards in order to feed into Lucian and Charleston, and we're going to talk about card by cards of all the new additions that I've decided to include in this deck. So first of all, we have Dr. Pershing. Dr. Pershing used to be a card that I would include in the sideboard for slower matchup. I often, and I think this card was very, very bad against Boba in the previous set because it was just a magnet at ambush card. In an ambush heavy meta, Dr. Pershing is very bad. I did just basically a magnet for those ambush and just doesn't accomplish a whole lot. But in this meta, it turns out that this card is amazing. It's amazing because it's good against the mid-range grindy deck because it will draw you a couple of cards before dying. So it's a card advantage engine, which is very important in those kind of super grindy mid-range or soft control matchups. And it's also a card that is quite good against aggro because it gives you like a turn 1 play. If you are playing first, you can basically start with Dr. Pershing, and then you can go turn 2, removal, whatever your opponent's unit is played, and then you get this constant source of card advantage. Usually playing a turn 1 card makes your Charleston weaker because then you can't get a Charleston 6/6, but Dr. Pershing makes up for that by drawing you cards, which means that you will be able to get your Pershing at 6/6 anyway. It's a win-win situation. If your opponent doesn't deal with it, you just draw a bunch of cards. If your opponent does deal with it, then you basically save some damage. So it is really just an excellent card, even against aggro, surprisingly enough. And of course, against all those kind of slower, grindy matchup, it just is an incredibly good card. It is by far, to me, in my opinion, has been one of the best cards in the deck throughout the tournaments, and I will never back down until 3, unless we are in a very, very strange meta where Dr. Pershing happens to not be good anymore. But Dr. Pershing was a huge highlight of this new list that I've put together. Moving on, we got also Palpatine. So Palpatine was featured in some hard control lists, but their numbers were dwindling. People were going down to 2 and then down to 1. Palpatine, in my opinion, is back in the menu. Is one of the best top ender you can have in those mid-range and in those aggro matchups. As it's basically a barrage and it's attached to a unit. It's very, very strong. And I was very happy to have this card in every single matchup and never went back. Basically, it's a card I would basically almost never side out. So it's just an amazing, amazing card and very flexible and I think very well positioned in the current meta. It's very good against Django. It's very good against Sabine. It's very strong against pretty much everything. So it's just a great card. So. Going back to 3 was another kind of meta call that I did, which I think paid off very, very well throughout the tournament. Then we got the Supreme Leader Snoke. Supreme Leader Snoke is very well positioned in the meta simply because it is the ultimate answer to, in my opinion, one of the strongest deck in the game right now, which is Django Red. You play Snoke against Django Red. Django Red is going to be in a very, very tough position. If he does a Django Red, does not have many removal, so very hard for him. And at that stage of the game, he's probably already used Tarkin Town, which means that Snoke is unlikely to be dealt with. And as long as he's in play, the half of the deck of the Django Red player cannot simply just dies on arrival, and everything else becomes a lot weaker protecting you very well. If you have a Snoke in play, and you have if you have a Snoke in play, and you have and you're very healthy, and you're not on the brink of death, because otherwise it can finish you off with a Daring Raid or another Ruthless Raider, then Super Leader Snokes just single-handedly win you the game. And obviously a card that just is a win button against one of the most powerful decks in the game deserves to have 3 copies. So I got 2 copies in the main deck and 1 copy in the sideboard. It's also, of course, a card that's really good in other matchup. And since I play the full package of Palpatine, Snoke and Palpatine go very well together. You play your Snoke, you make everything small, and then you play next turn you play your Palpatine and you kill absolutely everything. Just a great. Those guys really go very well together, and I've used that a lot throughout the tournament. Just such a great card. So much better position than it was in the previous meta, in my opinion. Then we also got some new cards from Twilight of the Republic. We got the Merciless Contest. I think this card is amazing because Power Darkside is the best single target removal in the game, and Merciless Contest in this deck is not far from Power Darkside. Because obviously you have to kill your own unit if you have a unit in play, but if you don't, then you don't have any downside. Obviously, it has a couple of inconveniences. First of all, it is not blue. It is so it doesn't help Charleston, but the list otherwise is very blue heavy, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. Second inconvenience, of course, defeating your own unit if you have a unit in play. If you go Pershing turn 1, then. But the thing is, like, my deck has such a diverse amount of removal that I don't think Merciless Contest is having Merciless Contest just killing your own is that big of a deal, because if you got a unit in play, you just use a different removal, and then whenever you have no unit in play, which is bound to happen at some point, especially in this deck, then you just use Merciless Contest instead. So you're going to be using Merciless Contest in priority in the early stage of the game where you don't have a unit in play, so then you can use Power Darkside later on. The third inconvenience of this card is that it doesn't deal with leaders, but actually sometimes this is an advantage. I've been in multiple situations where my opponent had a low health leader that I didn't really care much about and a very large units, and I could Merciless Contest and actually defeat the other units. And he couldn't choose his leader. And it also means that whenever you have BOSSK in play, Merciless Contest does not actually kill your own leader because you have to choose a non-leader unit. So it is it is a card that I found to be very close in power level to Power Darkside, and that alone makes the card absolutely 100% worth it in this build. Once again, if you are in awkward situations where you can't play this card really, it's most likely because you played it wrong and you haven't played it when you had the occasion to. So very rarely was I stuck with Merciless Contest and could not really play it. I had to play it on my own units or whatever. I actually haven't done this a single time in the tournament, I think. I don't think I've killed my own units with Merciless Contest a single time this tournament. So, and when I say tournament, I also mean when I was testing, because of course I did a heavy amount of playtesting before the end of the tournament, and very rarely did I ever kill my own unit with that card. So it's just an amazing addition to hard control decks. Next we got the Vanquish. So Vanquish is back on the menu simply because now people have been trying to find cards that basically manage to dodge both takedown and Fell Dragon. And Vanquish is the answer to this. With Vanquish, you basically be able to kill the unit no matter its size. The fact that it's one cheaper than Rival's Fall is actually pretty relevant from my experience. Some people would play Rival's Falls instead. But yeah, it turns out that from my experience, the one resource discount happened to be quite relevant in this specific deck, at least. Because in this deck, you're not necessarily looking for necessarily super general answers, because you got so many cards in hand and such a wide diversity of removal. You would rather have more specialized and more powerful removal rather than just super flexible answers. Obviously, you want to have a little bit of both, but I found that, from my experience, at least in hard control, Vanquish happens to be a little bit better than Rival's Fall. I just have out of the one copy, mostly is an answer to Ruthless Raiders, which is one of the most annoying card to play against if you're playing control. Is one of the most powerful card in the Django deck. So Vanquish really helps with this, but obviously it's just a solid card in general. Then we got Perilous Position. Perilous Position is another new addition for Twilight of the Republic, and I've said on the record that I found make an opening to be better than Perilous Position. At least that was my first impression. And oh god, was I wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. If you can quote me on one of the things I was the most wrong about is Perilous Position is so much better than Make an Opening. And it's not even close. There's so many reasons for this. The first reason, of course, is the fact that it does exhaust the unit. Perilous Position is just a far more flexible card because it can not only, of course, kill small units and is, of course, a main deck answer to TIE Phantoms. It's also exhaust the unit, so it also is an answer to large units. You block that unit, you tap it down, and then it becomes weaker, which means that next turn you can kill it with either Vigilance or Takedown or something like this. By the way, I didn't talk about Takedown, but Takedown is also very well positioned in the meta. Of course, great against Sabine, not bad against Django, and great against one of the worst matchups for this deck, which is Han 1 Yellow. Back to Perilous Position. So Perilous Position is so incredible because of his ability to exhaust the enemy unit whenever your opponent kind of change of heart or your unit. You can also use Perilous Position to kind of tap down this unit, and you get the unit back. Yes, weaker, but you get it back, which is nice. Also use Perilous Position. I don't know if you saw multiple times against Josh when he had this Cop Veins, and he goes like Overwhelming Barrage, kill my stuff. I was like, okay, fine. I just Perilous Position your Cop Veins. Not only am I the Cop Veins tap down, it doesn't die right away, which is actually very relevant. And I know that he will basically get tapped down, he will die at the end of the phase, and because it's that death happened at the end of the phase, he basically doesn't actually get to get an extra unit, and I managed to do this twice. And I think that when I did this the second time around, this won me the game pretty much. It was just such a huge swing in my favor. So obviously pretty lucky to get that card at that specific moment every time, but just Perilous Position and a lot of like small application like that, which makes it such a super relevant card. The fact that the -2/-2 is permanent is extremely relevant, far more relevant than Healing 2 from Make an Opening. You will see I still play Make an Opening in the sideboard, but Perilous Position is undeniably the better card, and it's not even close. And it is an awesome addition to this deck, a huge boost to this deck in my opinion. Then we got Entrench. I just want to talk a little bit about it. I went from 3 copies to 2 copies. I think the card is becoming a little bit less important as we are playing more Power the Dark Side effect, which makes it a little bit awkward, but obviously entrenching on unit is still very much a very powerful thing to do. And not only that, it still gives you like those kind of answers. Since we're not playing Rival's Falls, entrench a big leader to block him and save us time until we get to the Super Laser Blast is super relevant. It's also another answer to TIE Phantom, which is absolutely everywhere in the meta. So I think Entrench is still a card that is worth playing, even though it has become a little bit worse because of we play more because we play more Power Dark Side. So this is a sideboard card. We'll talk about this after. So now we're just going to talk about the sideboard plans for the deck and what are the different plans that we have, the game plans that we take for each of the matchup. And something that is very important to do whenever you are preparing for a tournament is do enough playtesting so you can understand what are the different matchup and what you get to do in each of the matchup and how those actually play out and what is your game plan to win the game in each of those matchups. So we're going to talk about this alongside, of course, what is my sideboard plan for this. So we go into first, we got the blue-white mid-range deck. So blue-white mid-range is actually a matchup that really depends on whether it's a favorable or disfavorable matchup, really depends on the build that your opponent is playing. There are blue-white mid-range decks that are extremely grindy, that plays where everything in the deck does a 2-for-1. You got Yoda, you got K2SO, you got, what's it called? You got Tech, you got sometimes Pillage, you got obviously the 4 throws. There's so many ways to do 2-for-1 in those decks, and those decks can really outgrind you and basically out-resource you sometimes. So that's the thing you have to be aware about, because that's the way you lose the game. If the opponent just 2-for-1s every time and manage to basically just out-gauss you, basically. So in this matchup, I do not make many changes because blue-white mid-range are typically a very good matchup, as most mid-range decks are. and I was not expecting mid-range deck to be particularly well prepared against hard control in this tournament, so all I did was just taking out the restart, taking out top target, and adding more late game, and the late game is obviously Krayt Dragon, which is incredible in those kind of super slow grinding matchups. So you will notice that Krayt Dragon, usually a big fan of this card in the main deck, decided to move this away from the side into the sideboard. The main reason is because Krayt Dragon is a terrible late game card against aggro, and I was expecting aggro to be everywhere, so I wanted to gear my deck to beat aggro. So this is why the Krayt Dragon will move to the sideboard. So top target is not terrible, but not amazing, and then the restock obviously is quite useless. Everything else in the deck is quite good, so we're going to keep that in for this deck. So how do you win this matchup? Well, you simply try to draw a lot of cards. So basically, typically like a death mark double draw is insane. Pershing early on in the game is perfect. And then you basically answer their threat. And staying alive is usually not going to be the difficulty because mid-range are by definition relatively slow. The difficulty is really to try to make sure that you don't get behind in terms of card advantage. It's one of the few matchups in Star Wars Limited where it's very value focused. And once you reach the late game, then you start putting down the Avengers, just start to put down the Krayt Dragon, and you hope that this takes over the game. So, next matchup I prepared against is Cad Red. Cad Red here, this new mid-range deck, which is a very good matchup, but incidentally, there's a lot of cards that we have prepared against Django Red, which happen to be quite good against Cad Red as well. Cad Red just plays a lot of small units with low HP, like the Crafty Smugglers, the Crafty Smugglers, the Greedos, the Wind Rider. All those cards are just very easy, cheap units that are easy to kill. So make an opening really does work well in this matchup. It's a matchup that can go quite a bit in late game sometimes. So Krayt Dragons, Super Ninja Snokes came in. Clan Saxon Gauntlet is another answer to forgot the name, to TIE Phantoms, also an answer to those like space units that you will play sometime, like Punishing One, or even the P-38 Starfighters. So Clan Saxon Gauntlet really helps with that. Aside of what we side out, so obviously restock is going to be sided out in every single matchup that is not a hard control matchup. Dr. Pershing also is the only matchup where I side out the Dr. Pershing, but Dr. Pershing just happens to just be a magnet at... It just dies very, very quickly to Cad Bane's ability and like Wind Riders and stuff, so it just doesn't really accomplish a whole lot in this matchup. It's just very easy to kill. And it's not a super grindy matchup. It's not nearly as grindy as the blue-white mid-range deck, where really in this matchup, sticking card advantage doesn't matter as much. Just sticking out and playing a massive threat like Krayt Dragon, Snoke, or even an Avenger is going to be enough usually to win the game. So card advantage is not a really big deal in this matchup. And that's also why I side out the Death Mark. Death Mark just very difficult to use in this matchup. My opponent is going to be playing Disabling Fang Fighters. After sideboard, he's probably going to be playing McClunky to get rid of the Death Mark. So Death Mark is very hard to use. You could make the same argument for Top Target, but Top Target is a lot cheaper, so a lot easier to sneak in when your opponent is tap out and use a removal in combination to be able to redeem it right away. It's also kind of a card that the heal is just very much more relevant in this matchup than the card draw, and since it only costs 1, it's not really as big of a blowout if it does get countered. So it is, in my opinion, a card that I would really want to have in the deck, as opposed to Death Mark, which is a lot more awkward to use, and the benefit of having it is just not as big. So that's basically Cad Red matchup. As you can expect, this matchup is very, very favorable for hard control. I'm expecting Cad Bane deck might be able to do some changes to their deck in order to improve the matchup, but I think I don't see how this can be a good matchup for them. The only thing they have against us is the Bazine McClunky synergy, which can be quite good at getting rid of like some -2, -2s, and then kind of like try to sneak in like a TIE Phantoms and win the game like this. That's like it's. But I have so many answers, even with the McClunky Bazine. I have so many answers to TIE Phantoms. That's not really a reliable plan anyway. I just like I'm saying 3 Snokes, 3 Make an Opening, 3 Perilous Position, the Entrench as well, and the Clan Saxon Gauntlet. I just have so many answers. So moving on now to the matchup against Hard Control. So Hard Control, talking mostly about Hide in Blue, which I think is a deck that is quite decent in this meta. I don't think it's as good as BOSSK because I think it's not really good against aggro. Yes, you get the discounted. Yes, you get the discounted vigilance, but you don't have the double heal bounty shenanigans. You don't have the same ability to deal with cheap units. But the deck has a couple of arguments. Of course, the new Equalize is very strong against Django Red. So yeah. But anyway, the sideboard is pretty much the same whether you're playing against BOSSK, Blue, Hide in Blue. You might make a few adjustments, but the main idea is you're gonna add the Grey Dragons. As I said, in those matchups, I don't have much sideboard in those matchups because usually the most important game is game 1. What's going to happen very often is game 1 is going to be pretty long, and then on game 2 you don't have to finish the game 2. You don't have the time to finish the game 2, which would end up in a 1-0, in which case your sideboard literally doesn't matter. So I don't dedicate a lot of sideboard cards, and also I was not expecting many hard control decks to be in the field. So basically I played 2 Grey Dragon, 1 Clan Saxon Gauntlet, and 1 Supreme Leader Snoke. More threats, just more useful stuff, sorry. And I take out basically answers which are not really real answers against hard control, like Peerless Positions and Trench. They are a card that have to be combined with another card to end up just doing what they're supposed to do, which is killing the unit. Entrenching a unit is not nearly as good as killing that unit in this hard control matchup where you're trying to stop stuff like Grey Dragon, Snoke, or even like something like I guess it's pretty decent against Avenger, but I just have so many removal. I would rather just side out a couple of them, especially the one that are kind of half removals anyway. Okay. Next matchup is the Django Red matchup. So Django Red is obviously a matchup that I was very, very well prepared for because I knew this deck was going to be everywhere. I think Django Red is naturally quite good against control, but we've built a deck in order to counteract this. So obviously playing the 3 Peerless Position in the main deck, and we're heading up 3 set of Make an Opening, which is so good against Django. There's just so many units that it can kill and heal your base at the same time. It's just incredible. It's another answer to TIE Phantom as well. Clan Saxon Gauntlet is obviously going to be our big kind of blocker. I actually did not play this card a single time the entire tournament. Just didn't happen to draw it when I was signing it in, and it ended up just winning me the game in the most unlikely scenarios possible in the grand final against Howard Williams. You've probably seen those games. Anyway, and then we of course have more copies of Snoke. So the game plan of Django is pretty much try to stay alive, try to stay healthy by double. One of the things is that Django Red is going to have difficulties preventing you from getting the double heal from top target because it doesn't run many removals. So you deploy your BOSSK. You put your top targets, you kill the units. There's just not much your opponent can do about it because it doesn't have that many removal. He might have some anti-upgrades, which is something if you're playing Django Red, you want to have the 3 Disembodied Fighters to deal with it. But once again, you can always kind of find an opening where your opponent is tap out. He's playing an aggro deck. He cannot just afford to keep his mana up for all day. He's going to have to commit at some point, tapping out, in which case you can take that opportunity to play the top targets and then kill the units afterwards. And there's just it's very difficult to play around this for Django. So you're trying to stay alive with double reading your health, and then at some point you try to get to the point where you can put down a Snoke into play and then lock down the game like that. Obviously, there's other cards that are excellent. Pretty much all of our top end are good. Whether you talk about also like Palpatine is also excellent in the matchup. Will kill the Fire Spray. Will kill the Raider and can leave a huge threat on the board. So as far as what we're sending out in this matchup, Avenger is the weakest of our top enders. So we're taking this out. Versus Contest is actually not so good in this matchup. Django Red has very easy time playing around the Power the Dark Side sort of effect because he can just play cheap units to make sure that this kind of doesn't matter. And of course, it's also a matchup where your opponent has relatively few removal, which means that we are going to have units in play in a lot of situations, making Merciless Contest very awkward. And also, if your opponent managed to stick TIE Phantoms into play, you do not want to have too many of those kind of effects in your deck. So Merciless Contest happens to be kind of an awkward removal in this matchup. And we have plenty of better removals here with Make an Opening, notably. And then, of course, we stock. Moving on, we got the old on matchup, so mostly the old on yellow. So in this matchup can be quite difficult if the hand 1 yellow knows what he's doing. Basically, the plan for them is to try to put pressure on you to the extent where you have to tap out, and then he's going to be basically smuggling out a DJ. Whenever you tap out, he's going to smuggle out a DJ to prevent you from getting up to the before you get to 8 resources. And if the hand yellow is able to put pressure on you and prevent you from ramping up to 7, it's it can be very difficult. It's going to be a very difficult game. And the thing is, like, the deck plays a lot of hand discards, so Spark of Rebellion, Body Rook, Kira, so many cards that can kind of protect their DJs, so then they can take answers out of your hand and then just smuggle a DJ, and that's going to be very difficult. Of course, Tech is also a very strong card, so it's a difficult matchup. It's hand 1 yellow, in my opinion, is the only deck that without dedicating any sideboard card against you is naturally gonna have a good matchup against you. I was expecting to not see so many hand 1 yellow, simply because hand 1 yellow struggle against aggro most of the time, and with such an aggro meta, I was not expecting to see a lot of hand 1 yellow, but I still had a plan against it, and my plan was to just multiply the amount of answers to DJ, and for this, I got False Choke. False Choke is just an excellent card in the matchup. Yes, of course, it does cards advantage, which can be annoying because it's a matchup that can be quite grindy, especially with all the smuggles that he has. Making a hand player draw card is definitely annoying, but it is so important to have especially more answers to DJ, and especially cheap answers, so we can kill the DJ before he gets to defeat the resource next turn with Hand's ability, so we can get the resources back. Obviously, we also play some late game, like Cray Dragon. We take out the Snokes because they don't really do much in this matchup, and you don't want to have too many top enders, because then if your opponent prevents you from ramping up to 8, you're going to be a lot of trouble otherwise. Top target, interestingly enough, it's relatively easy to prevent the hand 1 yellow from aggroing you out. So top target happens to not be so good in this matchup. The difficulty against hand 1 yellow is to prevent them from getting out of control with all of their cards, while also preventing us from getting up to our critical 8 resources that we need to play Super Laser Blast because of DJ. So typically the health doesn't matter so much. The top target simply is going to side it out, and so does restock as usual. Moving on to Sabine Green. So in the Sabine Green matchup, we're pretty well prepared overall against Sabine. Obviously, the plan against Sabine is to stay alive and try to get, once again, a double redeem on the top target. In this case, we have to really play around ECL, preventing him from one-shotting our BOSSK, either by forcing him earlier. And the best way to do this is to get a Charleston ad. Charleston is by far the most important card of the deck. So yes, it gets one shot by Wrecker and Poe, but at least it trades by doing so. And once again, once the ECL has been used on Charleston, we can then deploy our BOSSK, double redeem our HP, and just win the game, because we have. I don't think Sabine can deal with a double healing thing. If this cannot happen, we need to find some sort of ways. Obviously, top target still, even if you don't get the double redeem from BOSSK, top target is still a great card, and the idea, of course, to keep the board clean and heal ourselves with vigilance, with obviously the top targets, and that's basically how we play this matchup. So after sideboard, we are going to be adding in the Force Choke, which is going to be more answers against the large units, another cheap answers against Sabine. Typically, we want to use Force Choke early on in the game, and and later on we can just resource them. We don't want to use Force Choke later on in the game because we don't want to give more cards to Sabine. Clan Saxon Gauntlet is not amazing in this matchup, but it's just another card where you have this in play, you know you're not going to be aggro out in space. However, it does become a lot better if you're playing against Sabine Yellow that can just attack with right away with stuff like Million Falcon. As far as what we side out, or as usual, the restock, Super Blast is not amazing in this matchup because usually we're going to try to. Sabine is usually in the late game not going to try to swarm the board, but rather try to finish you off using 4 cards, I believe in. So by the time you get to 8 resources, there's just not going to be a lot of units in play. Still a card that can be good sometimes, but not often good. And then Avenger is by far the worst top enders we can have in this matchup. We, once again, so much better to play just a Snoke, an Emperor's Palpatine. So we have a less top end in order to have like more, be able to really play and have the answers we need in the early stage of the game. So the Kira Krennic Green matchup is typically going to be pretty good for us because those are kind of like mid-rangey decks. Sometimes Kira Krennic can have a meal plan where they're going to be trying to meal you out using vigilances, but they usually don't play restock in that case, and that gives us an advantage. So if we are playing against someone who has a meal plan, like for example the Palpatine blue that Howard Williams was playing, in this case the sideboard is going to be a little bit different. We might take out some of the entrench or maybe the Pyrrhus position, and instead we're going to keep the top targets because top targets is actually quite good against in those kind of milling situations because it allows us to heal a bunch, and healing is basically kind of reverse meal. Like if you are if both players kind of meal each other at the same time with the same amount of cards, whoever is the more healthy is going to win the game. This is why when I was playing against Josh on this game 2 that I won the game by putting down Krayt Dragon with 29 HP, but to be fair, I don't think I needed Krayt Dragon in that situation because we were at about the same amount of card left in our discard. Yes, he was playing a 65 card deck, but I basically meal him enough so we could kind of equalize. And because he drew so many cards throughout the game, we ended up just being about the same amount of cards. And obviously, if I was at 12 HP and he was at 29, he was going to die first. And in that context, the heal is just super important and allows you to keep yourself alive while your opponent dies is very key. But this is the sideboard, assuming my opponent does not have a Vigilance restock plan. In this case, my opponent is typically going to win with some anti-control, hard control card like Relentless, Palpatine's Returns, trying to grind me out. In this case, of course, we are all full on late game, adding the Krayt Dragons, the Clan Saxon Gauntlet, which is just more threats. And we have, of course, we take out the restock because this is not going to be decided by HP. It's going to be decided by board presence and ability to stick a threat on the board and the ability to take over the game. Moving on, that is it. I think we've covered all the most important matchups. So we're going to come back to the deck here. And we're going to talk about the card that I've decided to not include in my BOSSK control deck. So let's start with this. First of all, we got a Fine Edition. So a Fine Edition is the card that a lot of people have considered for this deck. It has 2 major advantages. The first one is like it's a cheap event that you can throw under the belt for redemption. So in order to deal with Relentless, sorry. So if your opponent plays Relentless, you can play this for 0. It gets cancelled by Relentless, and then you can play removal. Can be a cheap way to get rid of Relentless. Very, very niche, and as I was expecting in the tournament, not many people actually run Relentless, so pretty irrelevant. And even if there were, I think there's just better ways to counter Relentless, in my opinion. Obviously, the main purpose of the card is to basically get back an upgrade. Typically, going to be it's basically extra copies of Deathmark or extra copies of top targets and stuff like this. Unfortunately, I found this card from my testing, I found this card to be quite situational. There's just simply going to be a lot of situation where you're going to be drawing that card and you don't happen to have any upgrades in your discard. At the end of the day, we're only playing 9 upgrades, and those upgrades are fairly situational by themselves. So it just happens to be quite awkward, and also you can't just play it. A unit has to have been defeated this phase for this to be able to be played. Just very situational, very awkward to play. I didn't find this card to be particularly good, so I decided to not include it in my deck. Next, we got Daring Raid. Daring Raid can be quite good in this meta because there's a lot of 2 health units, especially against Django. And as you saw probably in one of my games, sometimes dealing 2 damage directly to the base can be useful. With that being said, I just find the card to be too situational. Even if I'm really looking for specialized answers against Django, I would rather just play Make an Opening. And of course, it is also a non-blue card. You have to be very worried about any non-blue card that you're putting in your deck because it makes your Charleston weaker. And I would never put a non-blue card unless it's absolutely amazing, and Daring Raid is definitely not one of those cards. Then we got Inferno Fall. Inferno Fall can be a decent turn 1 play. It's also pretty good against Django as it trades with most of their space units and also is a great answer to TIE Phantom. With all that being said, I just find the card to be not so good in other matchups. I think if I'm going to go for turn 1 play, I would rather just skip my turn 1 to be able to have initiative and kill that unit with a removal, or I would rather just play Pershing. So I just found the turn 1 play to not be particularly strong. So yeah, it's good against Django, but that's pretty much the only thing it's good against in my opinion. So decided to not include this card. It's also quite good against in the control mirror because it gives you like a cheap stuff to throw under the bus for Power Dark Side. But once again, I was not expecting to see a lot of hard control decks, so Inferno Fall just didn't make the cut. Next we got Bloodsport. Some people have been talking about this card a lot. I think this card is just too situational. It only affects ground, which is not good in the meta, and it's just not the right meta for this card. It's not a bad card by any means, but it just is not the right card for the meta. Equalize. I actually strongly consider playing Equalize out of aspects, so for 5 resources, because 5 getting rid of 2 units against Django is very, very strong. I think the card is amazing, and if you want to improve the Django matchup even more, you could actually include a couple of Equalize in your sideboard. I just thought that was a little bit overkill. I think I have enough stuff against Django already. I don't think I need to add more. And this card is really only good against Django, and so it's just not good enough. Next, we got Lompike. Lompike can be a very strong consideration for those grindy matchups. Notably, I'm talking about kind of like against control, it's quite good. Like against soft control, it's quite good. It's 4/6, very awkward sideline, cannot be killed by takedown, cannot be killed by Feather Dragon. Can shield himself, giving shield to opponents mostly irrelevant because of removal, don't really care about shield. And of course very strong against people who play a lot of pillage, a lot of discard, because it gives you like stuff to do with the smuggle. So if the matchup becomes very grindy, I think a Lompike could become a really strong consideration for the deck. Next we got Pillage. Pillage is by far the biggest card I've decided to cut in my deck. I just find Pillage to not be particularly well positioned in the meta. It's obviously quite awful against aggro, whether you're playing against Django or Sabine. It's also and it's also not very good against hard control, because against hard control there's just so many cards that are becoming kind of useless that making your opponent discard those cards is just not that big of a deal, because by definition in a hard control matchup you just have a lot of dead cards. So Pillage is just very low impact in those matchups. It's good against everything else, but just the fact alone that the card doesn't help us in the most difficult matchups and the most played decks was a reason for me to cut this card out. I don't think it's the right meta for Pillage. And once again, it's a non-blue card, so that's another factor as well. So in my opinion, Pillage is definitely been cut out. Has definitely been cutted out of the deck. It might come back depending on the meta, but for now it is out. Next we got Rival's Fall. I think the meta is just not particularly good for Rival's Fall. There's just not like those kind of big leaders that are such high value to destroy. I mean, it's quite good against Anakin, but I just didn't feel the need for it. We have Entrench to block leaders and then get into Blazer Blast to get rid of them. And we also can play, of course, Power the Dark Side. So, yeah, I didn't really feel the need for Rival's Fall. I still think it's a playable card in this deck, so it's up to you if you want to include it or not. There's definitely some situation where it's quite good. So, and that's it. So that's it for everything I had to say about my updated version of BOSSK Control and how does it fare into the meta. I think it's a very, very well positioned deck. Might not be so in the future. Might be some people adapting to it and try to beat it. But for now, for at least for Birmingham, it was the right deck choice, and if I had to replay the tournament, I would not change a single card. With that being said, if I was going to bring this card to a new tournament, I would probably maybe prepare a little bit more for the mirror, because I would obviously expect a lot more people playing this card. So I would probably maybe include like a Bounty Hunter crew instead of a Avenger in the main deck, just to help for the mirror match. But that would pretty much the only change I would make for this deck if I wanted to bring this tournament to a new tournament tomorrow. Now let's talk about, so for the people who do not want to play this deck and want to beat it, what are the new, so I already made a video about how to beat Heart Control, so you can look for it. I probably would put it in the description. This video, of course, is from Spark of Rebellion, but everything I say in this video I think is still very relevant today. I'm just going to update the list by adding more to the list of cards that I think can really be very strong against Heart Control. So we move on directly to so talk about the Twilight of the Republic card that are good against Heart Control. And small threats are usually very good against Heart Control because Wartime Trader Official is a very good example. This card does not die to any of the -2/-2, and it basically provides you with a threat that you can attack with every turn, and it's an excellent way to block Power of the Dark Side because it dies and then leaves another Battle Droids behind, which is once again going to be an answer to and because they have 3 health, not so easy to kill, even if I put like something like a bounty on it and then start just pinging it off. It's just so annoying to deal with, and it's just going to be like a card that's going to protect you against Power Dark Side and that kind of thing. So I think Wartime Trader Official is quite a good card against Heart Control from the new set. Then we got, I wanted to talk about another card before, but yep, okay, no, maybe it's after. Reprocess is another card that I think can be quite good against Heart Control. If you're playing like a token deck or a deck that really, even like generally just at the green-black card, put the 4 cards back into your discard pile. Is 4 units back into your deck can be quite strong. It's kind of like a restock, but it cannot restock itself, which is pretty big deal. So restock is still going to be better at dealing with meal, but it gives you 4 units, 4 battle droids, and that can be very, very annoying to deal with for Heart Control. Like once again, especially if I set it out the Snoke and stuff like this, just a lot of stuff that will absorb the Power Dark Side, that kind of thing. So can be quite annoying to deal with, and could be a consideration for you if you want to beat Heart Control. Okay, Confederate Courier is another great card for the same reason as the Wartime Trade Official. For the same reason, it's a little bit weaker in the sense that it dies to bounty plus ping from BOSSK, but it hits for harder, and it can be really annoying to get rid of. And once again, absorb those Power Dark Sides and do quite well in this. So now we're getting into the real anti-Heart. So those cards I've talked about earlier, they're nice. They're kind of cards that can be quite annoying against Heart Control. But let's talk about the real Heart Control killer of this new set. And that's obviously Stella Guerrera. This card is so incredibly strong against Heart Control. It is basically almost a guaranteed 3-for-1, assuming you're playing enough tactic in your deck, but there's a lot of cards which are tactics. Open Fires, Takedown, and obviously Pillage are the main tactics that you're going to be playing in your deck. And if you're playing 9 of those tactics, you're very likely to find one out of Stella Guerrera. She is a 4-3-for-4, so it's quite a threat. Doesn't die to -2/-2, puts quite a bit of pressure because she has 4 attack. 4-3 is actually quite a good stat line against Control, believe it or not. And she's going to search for something when she comes into play, dealing damage to your base, which is completely irrelevant against Heart Control. And then she, once again, when she dies, she gets another one. So she's almost a guaranteed 3-for-1, and if you get into, let's say she comes to play, finds a first pillage, and then she dies and gets another pillage. Each of the pillage do 2-for-1, so that would be basically a 3-4... 3-4... So you spend 3 cards and you're removing 4 cards plus the removal 5 cards. So 3-for-5, which is pretty insane. As well as adding additional pressure. So it's just if you're playing a red-white mid-range deck, like Anakin or Anakin Red or even a Yoda Red, Stella Guerrera is going to be, in my opinion, one of the best cards you could possibly play in this matchup. It's just so incredible. Then we got Shadow Intentions, another card, another silver bullet that I think, if played at the right moment, can completely turn a game upside down. Basically, when Shadow Intention, you can turn any of your unit in sort of a TIE Phantoms. The only major difference is that TIE Phantoms is also immune to damage. That this card is not immune to damage, But if you play this on a large enough units, then you don't really care. So what I'm trying to say here is that, for example, the maximum amount of damage I can deal to a unit with my deck is going to be Palpatine, you can deal 6. So if you put this Shadow Intention on something that has more than 6 health, then that's going to be very, very tough for me to deal with it. And obviously, at the same time, it turns off all the power dark sides, all the merciless contest, and all that stuff, which is pretty incredible. This card can be absolutely backbreaking for me. Obviously, there's going to be a situation where I can pile up multiple Palpatines and stuff and get rid of it, but the amount of resources I'm going to have to do that is just going to be so huge, and I'm going to be forced into a certain play pattern that I might not be able to do. You could also play Shadow Intention before I get to Palpatine, and in which case you play this on your leader. Then the only thing I can do is just having multiple copies of open fire, which I may not have. So just a very powerful card that can really turn the game upside down. So I don't think this is a card you should have a 3 of, because you need to find the right timing to play it. But if you do, the card can really take the opponent by surprise and win the game by itself. So yeah, Shadow Intention is definitely a new card. Obviously, there's plenty of other anti-art controlled cards. I just specifically talked about the new ones, the one that were brought by the new expansion, Twilight of the Republic. So obviously, if you're playing green-black, the Palpatines returns into Relentless are going to be back on the menu. If you're playing a red-white mid-range deck, you're going to be doing tons of 2-for-1s, the text, the pillage, that kind of thing. And if you're playing, if you're playing the disabling Fine Fighters, if you're playing aggro and all that stuff. So those are obviously still very much a thing. If you want to know more about this, just check out my previous videos about hard control. Anyways, thank you so much for following that video. This was as in-depth I could possibly go on this deck. I think this deck is very well positioned in the current meta, but it is not unbeatable. If you want to beat it, you can beat it. And there are decks which are naturally quite strong against it. So that's something you're going to have to keep in mind moving forward in upcoming tournaments. And I think overall it is healthy for the game that hard control is good, because it keeps certain strategies in check. And this is just more variety of different strategies. I think if the game was just made out of just different flavor of aggro decks, I think it would be quite boring. So I'm actually quite a big fan of having a couple of strong hard control decks. I don't necessarily want those decks to be tier 1, because I think the hard control mirror is still very much cancer, and we do not want hard control to be tier 1. But definitely, having this deck being an option is good for the game, in my opinion. In any case, thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time for another video. And I'll see you. And please, if you like the video, please like and subscribe as usual. And I'll see you next time.